Recording. Welcome to the third annual Brain Binge. We're very excited to have this cannibalism panel today with Zoe Smith and Mackenzie Bartlett. I'm going to begin. Oh, yeah, the two talks are called Meet Cute, Cannibalism and Sexuality in Modern Horror. That one is the first one you'll be hearing by Mackenzie Bartlett, and the second one is Zoe Smith's Cannibalism as Carnal Female Sexuality on Screen. But I'll introduce Zoe after the first talk, and in the meantime, I recommend as questions roll in, you can type them in the chat so that you don't forget from the first talk to the second. All right, so I'm going to begin with Mackenzie. Mackenzie Bartlett is a horror filmmaker, writer, and journalist. She's excited to return to Final Girls Berlin, this time as a speaker. We've had her short films in the past. Her award-winning shorts explore the intersection of body autonomy, pop culture, and horror, and have screened internationally. Her writing can be found in Grimm Mag, Screen Queens, and more recently on the cover of Fangoria. She personally identifies as a hag and resides in Portland, Maine. I'm gonna hand the floor over to Mackenzie.
Thank you. So true. Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming. I'm really excited to be here. I love Final Girls, and I'm very excited to be able to talk to you today. If you're here today, if you haven't seen my short films before, perhaps you know me from my New York Times okayest selling romance novel, Love in the Time of Cannibalism, which critics famously called fine. Or perhaps my self-help book, How to Succeed in Business by Eating Your Way Up the Food Chain Literally. We were hoping to get a blurb from one of the Shark Tank guys for that, but Barbara Corcoran never responded to my LinkedIn request. But if none of these things are true, there's only one other reason why you might be here today. You look like this: tired, insecure, can't find your right foundation shade, and you want to look like this: sexy, confident, just a little bitchy. Or maybe you feel like this: sad, lonely, gross, mysterious rash, and you want to feel like this: sensual, empowered, and social. What if I told you that there was an easy solution to all of these problems? What if I told you that the secret to these women's embodied confidence and dewy skin was as simple as a little change in diet? Enter the modern girl boss cannibal. She's not like other girls. She's self-assured, unapologetic. She's stepping into her sexuality, and the only weird thing she had to do to get that way was eat a little human flesh. She's complicated, but she's undeniable. She's feral, but she's free. The modern girl boss cannibal subverts what it means to be a woman in society. She's an it girl on the rise and in pop culture and on our vision boards because we want what she has. But how did she get that way? And what is it about this current moment in time that has us so primed for people eating? To answer these questions and to understand the death grip that movies like Raw, Jennifer's Body, Bones and All, and GINGERSNAPS have on us, we have to zoom way out and take a look at the history of cannibalism as a taboo in Western culture. Now, if you Google cannibalism, you'll probably get a million headlines that look a little something like this. Cannibalism is a sensational topic, and as you can see, it's one that's often referred to as our ultimate taboo. So, how did it get that way? This is no doubt a little bit of a generalization, but surely you'll forgive me when I say that, like many things, we can probably blame it at least a little bit on this guy. When he sailed the ocean blue in 1492, Christopher Columbus came to the New World with a dream: to find land and to find gold. But when the gold thing didn't really pan out the way he planned, Columbus refused to return to his homeland empty-handed, and he shifted his gaze to a more readily available yet unplanned for commodity: people. Yikes. And not only were they people, they were, according to Columbus, renowned for his amazing track record of both honesty and philanthropy, dog-faced mythical creatures who ate men. His reports back to the homeland were quite salacious, but these are good Catholic aristocrats we're talking about, which means they were super duper rational. In an official proclamation from Queen Isabella herself, it was decreed that anybody who was not a cannibal should so graciously be free from slavery and treated with kindness. But she also said exactly what to do if it turned out that everyone was in fact a cannibal. In an official decree, she says, if the cannibals continue to resist and do not wish to comply with my men, nor to be taught our sacred Catholic faith and be in my service and obedience, then they may be captured and taken to both my kingdoms and domains and other places to be sold. She's being so reasonable. Suddenly, Columbus had both a dream and a motive to call all the native people he encountered dirty, rotten cannibals. So let's get to the point, shall we? Minding your own business and not wanting to be forced into Catholicism, you're a cannibal. Not blindly following the orders of some idiot with a boat and a god complex, cannibal. Resistance in any shape or form, cannibal. Now, the sudden synonymous nature of these words, resistance and cannibal, was a real game changer for colonization efforts and a real win for a buzzword we somehow haven't mentioned yet, the patriarchy. The history of cannibalism is pretty complicated because most Western accounts of cannibalism in other parts of the world are either wildly exaggerated, lacking important context, or they're just completely made up. In his book, The Man-Eating Myth, William Ahrens identified that cannibalism has become a handy symbol for unacceptable behavior practiced by others, a really broad and malleable category of evildoers that include enemies, followers of non-Christian religions, and any groups determined to retain their uncivilized customs. And that's not to say that ritualistic or cultural cannibalism never occurred, but the legitimacy of those reports are often pretty murky at best. It is true, however, that in many instances of war and famine, regardless of geography, people have had to resort to eating their dead in order to survive. And this history is also really skewed by sensationalism. Instead of people turning feral on each other, people likely reluctantly had to eat their own family members who had succumbed to starvation themselves. These nuances might help to color in the extremely specific Western fear of cannibalism and the status of it as our ultimate taboo. A fear of cannibalism separates the us from the them being people outside of the mind virus of Western influence who we categorize as being uncivilized or animalistic, or people unlucky enough to fall victim to tragedy and to famine. To fear the cannibal is to assert our status as being above it entirely, regardless of circumstance. In summary, am I calling the mythos of cannibalism a tool of the patriarchy and of capitalism? Yes. Anyway, as the old adage goes, we are what we eat, and we also make movies about what scares us as a culture. So if horror films of any given decade might reflect an underlying social anxiety of the time, like the 80s slasher and Nancy Reagan, or torture porn and 9/11, so too does the cinematic cannibal. In the case of cannibals on screen, the power dynamics at play depend on who is doing the eating and who is being consumed. Like, for example, these beloved freaks. The Texas Chainsaw Family and Hannibal Lecter are two sides of the same fucked up coin. The family lives in poverty. They're part of the forgotten population of Middle America whose livelihood as farmers and factory workers was constantly being threatened by the social change of the late 70s. They're an unhinged, uncivilized caricature of people left behind by modern innovation. Their desire for flesh is twofold. A, their circumstance has afforded them the ability to see no real moral difference between the cows that they slaughter and the unsuspecting teens that roll into their town. And B, they eat people who represent the changes that have forced them into squalor. Hannibal Lecter, on the other hand, is an otherwise refined and upstanding member of society, and it's his refinement and social status that contributes to the sense of entitlement where the Texas Chainsaw Family eats because they believe they need to, Hannibal Lecter eats because he believes that he deserves to. So what is the difference between these raggedy man-eaters and these beautiful, gorgeous, perfect women? First, an important distinction between the male cannibal and the modern girl boss cannibal is choice, or the illusion of it. Where popular male cannibals often eat to sustain their ego, the girl boss cannibal eats to sustain their autonomy. Now, I know that you did not come to this place for science, but to science we must go for just a moment. Gary Paulus, renowned ecologist and scorpion expert, developed a list of cannibalism generalizations while studying in the field. These generalizations are a common reference point for instances of cannibalism in the animal kingdom, and they are as follows. 1. Immature animals get eaten more often than adults. 2. Many animals don't recognize individuals of their own kind, especially eggs in immature stages, who are simply regarded as a food source. 3. Females are often more cannibalistic than males. 4. Cannibalism increases when hunger is accompanied by a decrease in an alternative form of nutrition. And 5. Cannibalism is often directly related to the degree of overcrowding in any given population. So, what does this have to do with our girl bosses? Let's run it back with a little bit more context. Immature animals get eaten more often than adults, boys. Animals don't recognize individuals of their own kind, especially those who are immature, boys, famously immature. Females are more often cannibalistic than men, good for her. Cannibalism increases with the decrease in alternative forms of nutrition. A girl's got to eat. 5, cannibalism is directly related to overcrowding in a given population. There are too many boys. So when Jennifer Check said she wasn't killing people, she was killing boys, she wasn't being a sexist, she was doing science. The most important takeaway here is that this list of generalizations almost perfectly apply to most modern representations of female cannibals in horror. Where the male cannibal often acts from a place of ego, the female cannibal turns to a new diet purely for survival. Choice isn't often a luxury afforded to her. Now, I believe it was William Shakespeare who once said, some are born cannibals, some achieve cannibalism, and some have cannibalism thrust upon them. And in the case of the modern girl boss cannibal, the affinity for human flesh is either something you're born with or something that you contract, meaning that you belong to either girl boss cannibal subsect number 1, the hereditary cannibal, or girl boss cannibal subsect number 2, the transformed cannibal. And the latter is definitely true for these two ladies. Enter Jennifer Check and Ginger Fitzgerald. And again, I believe it was someone not Shakespeare, but just as prolific and equally influential on pop culture that once said, hell is a teenage girl. Now, world-renowned scorpion expert Gary Paulus wasn't brave enough to tackle the girl boss cannibal in his list of generalizations, but I am. Which brings me to girl boss cannibal subsect number 1, generalization number 1. You are changed in an act of gendered violence. Like its thematic predecessor, Carrie, the 2000s film GINGERSNAPS knows that the worst possible thing that can happen to a girl is high school, and subsequently getting your period. Morbid sisters Ginger and Bridget are the hot topic blueprint. They're obsessed with death and they hate everyone except for each other, and their all-consuming teen angst binds them so rationally to a suicide pact if, by the ripe age of 16, they aren't able to escape the suburbs. But their vibe is totally killed when on the night that Ginger starts her period, she's attacked by a stray beast and begins the change. Some say it was because the wolf smelled blood. I say misogynistic hate crime. When Ginger is attacked, it doesn't fully create, but rather amplifies a divide that was already growing between the two sisters. Boys were starting to notice Ginger, which hinted at the inevitable dissolution of their intense sibling relationship and ultimately the loss of childhood innocence. Puberty changes things. And if cannibalism is our ultimate taboo, then menstruation can't be too far behind. And for the average teenager, it's one that is deeply rooted in shame. Because Ginger gets the 1-2 punch of a visit from Aunt Flo and a fresh case of lycanthropy, it's like she gets to bypass all of the weird, gross stuff and instead experiences her changing body and emotions completely devoid of shame. And in classic teen movie fashion, we see this brand of sinister self-confidence in a trademark walking down the hallway scene. one that's mirrored later almost identically in 2009 in Jennifer's Body. Like Ginger, Jennifer is also changed in an act of violence. But unlike Ginger, Jennifer isn't some weirdo outcast virgin. She's hot and she's popular and she knows it. Her reckoning comes in the form of mediocre pop punk band Low Shoulder, who attempt to sacrifice her body in return for a record deal, in a scene that I would argue is pretty heavily coded as sexual violence. But joke's on them, because in contrast to the age-old trope of if you have sex, you die, it's the fact that Jennifer is decidedly not a virgin that ends up saving her. Which brings us to Girl Boss Cannibal subsect number 1, generalization number 2, the transformed feed to survive. Sure, they'll have to eat boys or they'll die, but other than that, cannibalism makes them way hotter and way better than us in basically every single way. From the very beginning, Jennifer knows how to weaponize and use her sexuality to get what she wants. So when she emerges from the woods with a ravenous thirst for boy blood, it's kind of no big deal. Even prior to the change, Jennifer tells Needy that they, girls, have all the power, that their boobs are like bombs. You just point them in the right direction and shit gets real. This moment in the woods, Jennifer's first feeding, unless you're watching the extended cut, is exactly that. It's an inherently sexual dynamic that Jennifer has always known the rules of, used to a new advantage. She seduces her prey using their expectations of girls against them. She's completely in control. Dr. Kate Robertson, film scholar and Jane Goodall of Female Cannibals, identifies in her article for The Atlantic that the modern female cannibal is motivated by physical hunger, but also by sexual desire, making them an extension of the femme fatale, which is the film archetype of the beautiful woman who deceives and ensnares men. In eating the flesh, they redirect this fear from the metaphorical to the physical. Cannibalism, in Jennifer's case, is a stand in for sex on her terms, and on her terms means entirely about self satisfaction. Cannibalism turns Jennifer and Ginger into selfish, horny, hungry menaces. So basically, it turns them into teenage boys with fangs, which means that they're too powerful to exist. And that brings us to the third and final generalization of Girl Boss Cannibal, subsect number 1. Your best friend is going to kill you. Now, man-eater is a term thrown around by not Shakespeare, but other poets like Hall & Oates and Nelly Furtado to describe a woman who uses men for sex, but doesn't love them. It's also a literal term for animals who see humans as beneath them on the food chain. And as you can recall, the exaggeration of cannibalism as a taboo has everything to do with man's fear of vulnerability and refusal to accept that they are anywhere but at the very top of the food chain. Because the food chain is for animals, and humans love to forget that we are animals too. This added layer of monstrosity to the femme fatale trope is essential to the identity of the girl boss cannibal. In 1993, Barbara Creed defined the term monstrous feminine to explore how, when women are portrayed as monstrous on screen, it's often in relationship to their reproductive bodily functions. However, in the initial films that she explored, like Alien, The Exorcist, and Carrie, the monstrous feminine, in the context that she was using, was used as a framing device to explore male anxieties about women's sexuality, and according to Creed, Freudian fears of castration. So let us reluctantly bring woman hater Freud into the fold for just a minute. If Ginger and Jennifer are completely driven by the id, so they're running on pleasure and hunger alone without the weight of moral quandary to kill their vibe, then Needy and Bridget are their super ego, moralistic counterparts. Or absolute buzzkills driven by jealousy or repressed homoeroticism. My official advice to you is before you head into the woods to bait a werewolf on the first night of your period, understand that your demise will come in one of two packages. A, your sister will kill you, maybe because you're recklessly hiding bodies in the family freezer, but maybe a little bit more because you've broken a sacred bond of sisterhood to never grow up. Or B, your childhood best friend will kill you, maybe because you've crossed a line by killing her boyfriend, but probably because she's in love with you. You see, unlike Ginger, who scoffs at the idea of eating a girl because it would be like fucking her, Jennifer Check famously goes both ways. And in the same way that men bypass heteronormative barriers for intimacy by playing contact sports, Jennifer and Needy do what teenage girls do best, which is just be really passive aggressive about it. It's that thing where if a guy pushes you on the playground, he has a crush on you, but instead, if you're struggling to understand your complicated feelings for your best friend, you might just eat all the boys that she likes. It's no mistake that Jennifer chooses to seduce and consume someone that Needy really likes, and that Jennifer's feeding and Needy having sex with her boyfriend happen in tandem with each other. Fear and desire are very similar emotions. Jennifer tells her victims that she needs them to be afraid for it to be good for her, and even Ginger confuses desire for hunger at first. After unsuccessfully trying to lose her virginity in the back of a car, she settles instead for just eating the neighborhood dog, saying that what she thought was a hunger for sex was actually just a desire to tear things apart. But when Needy pulls her boyfriend deeper inside her in the throes of intimacy, her eyes are wide open, somewhere else, clinging to this connection with Jennifer, even though it scares her. Because in some weird, psychosexual, telepathic way, they're really just trying to connect. And I think that that's beautiful. We could talk about the queer subtext of Jennifer's body, truly, truly, all day, but we only have so much time. But just know that if my hypothetical best friend was brutally assaulted by a boy band, and then it came out on the other side needing to eat the occasional high schooler, I would simply have not tried to kill her, but I guess that I'm just built different. I digress. Moving on. If you don't catch a case of cannibalism via werewolf or boy band, then you must be born with it. And if you're born with it, it means it's your mother's fault. Which brings us to Girlboss Cannibal, subsect number 2, the hereditary cannibal. Generalization number 1, you contract cannibalism as a form of generational curse. Original sin is the super chill ideology that every human on the face of the planet walks around with inherited sin from birth because of the selfish, hedonistic sins of women in general. Both Marin and Justine are the daughters of cannibals who, as an act of parenting most common in the animal kingdom, essentially abandon their young and leave them to fend for themselves. This act of self-discovery is the primary challenge of the hereditary cannibal, as they're forced out of the safety of girlhood and into the real world. Both Justine and Marin's cannibalistic awakenings, at least their conscious ones, rely on a very specific, intimate moment with a finger. For Marin, it's at a sleepover where she's tempted by fingers painted in polishes, scrumptiously named things like cinnamon glaze and copper fever. Her desire to bite her friend's finger are preceded by the same moments that might lead up to a kiss. Staring really closely at someone's neck, whispering close to each other's faces, and crossing that threshold in any relationship is a risk. Marin has urges that her girlfriends are repulsed by and that they can't relate to. And after Marin makes her move, she's outcast, both literally and metaphorically. Cannibalism stands in for queerness here, but especially in Bones and All, represents a class divide. Marin sees normal life, one with a stable household and a recurring cast of characters, as something that is completely outside of her reach. For Justine, eating her sister's finger is her first moment of self-actualization in an otherwise very guarded and sheltered life. Her parents raised her a devout vegetarian, sort of like a religion, but as we know, just like with sex ed, abstinence-only education is extremely ineffective at best, and it doesn't prepare you for the real world. For both of these women, their first taste of blood catapults them into unmarked territory, but it also provides them with meaningful context to finally understand themselves and the urges that they've been told are not natural but sinful. Which brings us to Girlboss Cannibal substick number 2, generalization number 2. They feed to thrive. Technically, unlike Ginger and Jennifer, Marin and Justine don't need to eat human flesh to survive. They do need it, however, to hashtag live their best lives, which might as well be the same thing. Let's consider the Girl Boss Gospel for a second with a passage from the guidebook. Self-care is a radical act. The decision that they're forced to make isn't whether or not to choose cannibalism. That's already been decided for them. What they need to do is decide if they're to follow in their mother's footsteps, either to a life of conservative secrecy or an unhealthy marriage, or to a life of self-isolation, maybe by chewing your own arms off and checking yourself into an institution, or the harder option, to carve a new path forward. These are classic coming of age stories at their very core. The girl boss cannibal navigates the loss of her childhood innocence or naivety towards womanhood or towards maturity. For Justine, this triggers a metamorphosis from a goody two shoes to a woman who fucks, kind of like when Miley Cyrus stopped being Hannah Montana and left the Disney Channel. Her newly discovered desire for human flesh is linked to her sexual awakening. And because we know that the girl boss cannibal's appetite frees her from societal norms, her sexual awakening is not one in search of an intimate connection or of romance, but purely for the female orgasm. Justine's sexual proclivity is entirely toward herself. She's turned on by feeling powerful and having this new lens through which to view herself. The cannibal that Julia Ducournau paints is one that views the body very literally as non-precious, non-sacred human flesh. Luca Guadagnino, on the other hand, takes a little bit more of a romantic approach. Marin's acceptance of her cannibalism happens in tandem with actively seeking out love and acceptance in the face of adversity, regardless of the risk. Which brings us to our final generalization. The hereditary cannibal will end up alone. Like any good coming of age story, the endings are often pretty bittersweet. First love has to end in loss for it to have meant something. The journey is one of symmetry. For both girls, they begin alone and they end alone, but are ultimately better for it, or at least a little bit more fully formed. For Marin, it's the loss of her and the consumption of her lover and her companion Lee. And for Justine, it's the imprisonment and loss of her sister's humanity and the realization that if she's going to avoid a similar fate, there's no roadmap and she'll have to do it alone. So we've seen a lot of success stories here today, I think. But what does that mean for all of us? Let me draw your attention for just a moment to the black widow spider. Now, these little freaks are one of the only examples of a species that does not attempt to avoid cannibalism at all costs. The list of cannibalism generalizations doesn't apply to them. It's just a part of their nature. And that's also because they're one of the only species living in a true matriarchy. While researching for this presentation, I came across an article by Chelsea G. Summers. She's the author of A Certain Hunger, which is a novel in which an aging food critic resists the loss of her relevancy and power as she ages by seducing and creating five-star meals out of her suitors. The article is really interesting, and you should all read it. But what struck me most was the URL. So let's zoom in on the tags for just a second. Girl boss, feral girl, goblin core, hot girl, female villains in popular culture, Jennifer's body, killing Eve, yellow jackets, eating, killing, men, feminism, women. I think if you were to show these combination of words to a pilgrim or to a member of the Donner Party, they would die instantly. But I also think that they kind of have like a weird archaic power about them. Like if we were to all hold hands and say it in unison 10 times, we might summon the spirit of Elizabeth Bathory. We're living in a time where cannibalism in pop culture is having a huge moment. It's very much in the zeitgeist. And that's because we're also living in a time where women and trans folks' lives and bodily autonomy specifically is being constantly threatened and picked apart. And the harsh reality of that situation is it's almost entirely out of our control. If you scroll TikTok for more than like 30 seconds, you'll see plenty of videos pathologizing the female experience down to its nichest, manufactured, weirdo subcategory. Some examples of this are girl dinner, feral girl summer, clean girl, that girl, rat girl autumn, baby girl, girl math. When Ginger Fitzgerald is burying a body in her backyard, she insists that they'll never be caught because no one thinks that girls are capable of doing something so terrible and so grotesque. She says that the only thing a girl can really be in society is a slut, a bitch, a tease, or the virgin next door. and that to get away with it, they just need to coast on the way that the world works. Try as we might to subvert or push back against the expectations of what it means to be a woman in society, in the process, we somehow end up commodifying every experience down to an aesthetic or a core. It's worth mentioning that these things are harmless and at their best might foster some sort of sense of togetherness between girls in general, which is cute and it's nice. But as Chelsea G. Summers writes, the figure of the girl boss cannibal is the ultimate feral girl. She's an archaic cultural force. You can't just shed your cannibalism like yesterday's heels because people who eat people can never take it back. The modern girl boss cannibal, problematic though she may be, lives entirely outside of trends and outside of the influence of the male gaze because she doesn't live in reality. She's able to subvert these stereotypes, bypass shame, and disregard guilt without having to do a lifetime of therapy about it like the rest of us. So legally, am I advocating that you leave here and give cannibalism a try? I don't know because I don't have a lawyer. But I'm just saying that if a spare finger or two makes its way into your artfully curated girl dinner, I don't really think that anyone can blame you for it. Thank you, everybody, for your time. The next time you see me will be on the road for my 2024 presidential campaign because I believe in a woman's right to choose cannibalism.
Thank you, Mackenzie.
Thank you.
Um, let's, yes, we're getting a lot of applause reactions from, I don't know what this was, but yes, duck hands and applause from the crowd. Before we respond to your really fun talk, we're gonna go to the second talk of the evening, and then afterwards there will be a conversation with both of you. Um, so I'm going to introduce you to Zoe Smith. Zoe Rose Smith is a film journalist and founder of Zobo with a Shotgun, specializing in anything extreme with a penchant for nasty, gory, and controversial horror films and books. She was the editor-in-chief of Ghouls magazine and is co-host on the Our Bloody Obsession podcast. She has written for publications including Fangoria, Daily Grindhouse, Second Sight, Unearthed Films, Tetro Video Films, 88 Films, Arrow Films Video, and Fractured Visions. And you're about to hear her talk called Cannibalism as Carnal Female Sexuality on Screen.
Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming along today. Mackenzie's talk was amazing. Mine is not as colourful. Mine is a little bit more depressing. I've gone for the very dark hues. So yes, today I am going to be talking about cannibalism as carnal female sexuality on screen. So I really wanted to look at like the relationship between cannibalism and in particular focusing on female sexuality. I feel like a lot of these kind of cannibal films, they're quite extreme in the way that they show female desire and kind of like the hunger for flesh. And I think kind of the other thing that I really felt came through in the films that I've chosen to look into today is kind of like the liberation of women's sexuality. And obviously Mackenzie spoke a lot about kind of like the girl boss cannibal. And I think that comes true throughout these kinds of films as well. And I also thought it was really kind of interesting to look at like the animalistic nature of wanting to almost, I guess, consume another human being and satisfy kind of like the craving that we have for eroticism and lust. So the films that I'm going to talk about today, you'll see another couple that obviously Mackenzie mentioned as well. But the films that I'm looking at today, so we have Trouble Every Day, which is directed by Claire Denis. This is a French film and it's from 2001. Then we are going to be looking at Raw, which is directed by Julia Durcanal, another French film from 2016. And then again, another French film, there's a slight theme here, as you can tell, is a film called Dans Ma Peau, which you might actually better know as In My Skin, which is directed by Marina Devan, who also stars in the film as Esther. And the last film that we will be covering is slightly different, is Bones and All, which is from director Luca Guadagnino, and it's a 2022 film. So all of these films, the reason I've kind of chosen them is I feel like they're really good depictions of female sexuality. Obviously, 3 of these films are from female directors, which I feel obviously really brings like a great kind of lived experience to the narratives in the stories, and also kind of like, you know, focuses on the female perspective of sexuality. I do think it's interesting, obviously, to look at Bones and All, I guess from more kind of like a male point of view and a male's perspective. 3 of these films are from France, and I think it's kind of important here to note that like the new French extremity movement, if you look at all of the films, whilst maybe they don't solely focus on like sexuality, but they are very like female-led and focused films, and a lot of them kind of look at this element between like pleasure and pain, which is something that kind of like goes throughout them all. And then, as I mentioned, kind of Bones and All feels like a slight kind of outlier to these films, but I think it's great to see kind of like a different perception and a different kind of reading from another gender on female satisfaction. So when I was putting this presentation together, one thing I noticed that I really loved about the posters for the movies is that they all have one thing in common. There's like a look of ecstasy on the face of all of the female characters. If you look here, Trouble, Raw, and Dan's all kind of focus on singular pleasure derived, whereas when we look at Bones and All, this actually kind of like looks a little bit more at pleasure with another person, not solely a kind of like solo discovery. So we will move on. So what I was interested in looking at was, why do cannibalism films have these kind of themes of sexuality and eroticism? And I kind of pulled out some points that I feel like really sums up how they kind of link back to one another. So the first thing is around carnal desire. So sex is kind of like a somewhat subconscious want and need in humans. For those of us who are sexually active, this desire for sexual intimacy is carnal. It kind of comes naturally and isn't something that we necessarily have control of. And I think in cannibalism, we see that there's this need to eat flesh, and it's also like a very carnal need. It's uncontrollable. And again, it's something that comes from like an inner primal place of desire and craving. Then there's animalistic nature. So I obviously mentioned this earlier, and I think it really kind of like continues the point on carnal desire. Our sexual instincts are very primitive and very animalistic in their nature. Much like animals, we have this kind of like need for sex, usually for reproductive purposes, which obviously humans have as well. But I guess our sex urges are often solely related to pleasure rather than just reproductive purposes. But I think in cannibalism films, we see how hunger comes in an animal form, with the urge to kind of eat, transforming the character with a cannibalism tendency into an animal in many ways, almost like entering a state of acting from like their primal urge to consume and to eat. So then we look at repressed sexual desires. So in all of the kind of like cannibalism films, we see that some of the characters try to, and rightly so, I guess, try to repress their want to eat another person. They almost like battle against this want to devour flesh. Women have been told by society to repress their sexuality and their sexual needs. And I would say that whilst times have kind of started to move forward and sexual desires are obviously a bit more accepted, I think in some cultures, and even I guess to an extent in kind of more Western cultures, we see that female desire is also like still somewhat taboo issue. So I think kind of like openly discussing female pleasure, orgasms, fantasies, and everything else is still like not completely accepted. So then we come on to a play on human senses. So sex obviously relies a lot on human experience and how we process the senses that are connected to our pleasure. We use sight to see, who we're attracted to, like the smell of their pheromones, the touch of their body and their skin, hearing their moans of ecstasy, tasting them with our lips and our tongues. And likewise, all of those senses are part of the, cannibalistic experience as well. So seeing the prey, smelling of their flesh, touching the parts that they want to consume, hearing their screams of fear, also like tasting, obviously, like their flesh. So lots of kind of like similar things there. So that brings us on to consumption of flesh. So both sex and cannibalism rely on the consumption of flesh, although in slightly different ways. When it comes to sex, we consume them through a physical connection, or I guess as a female, we might consume them by kind of taking a partner inside our body. With cannibalism, the same consumption obviously happens, although it's through physically digesting and kind of eating that flesh. But again, it's all about kind of like having another person inside your body. So then we have it as a metaphor for our hunger for satisfaction. So if we think of like when you're feeling really horny, it could almost be referred to as like a feeling of like feeling hungry for sex and for that satisfaction. We kind of crave intimacy and our bodies physically feel like we need it. And much like when we're hungry, we kind of need to satisfy that hunger. Cannibalism acts as like the perfect metaphor for this hunger. It's like an overwhelming desire to devour another human, and therefore kind of like satisfy this overwhelming urge within us. And then the final kind of point that I think, really connects them together is the connection between pleasure and pain. So when referring to sex, we often talk about, the blurring of lines between pleasure and pain. For some people, of course, sexual satisfaction is derived from inflicting pain on someone else or having pain inflicted on us. So from things like spanking to choking to BDSM play, sexual acts are often involve these aspects of pain that coincide with pleasure. And in cannibal films, they explore how pleasure and pain are linked as well. One person kind of gains pleasure from inflicting the pain on another one, by biting, eating, and again, kind of blurring those lines between pleasure and pain. So continuing kind of like this exposure of themes, these are kind of how it now plays into the 4 films that I feel like really kind of like give us a great look into female sexuality and cannibalism. There are themes throughout all 4 films that look at this female sexual perspective, and obviously from a cannibalism point of view. All of the 4 films have female leads. So we have Cora in Trouble Every Day, Justine in Raw, Esther in Dance Pew, and Maren in Bones and All. These 4 female characters all kind of find themselves on like, I guess, a journey of self-discovery through their newfound cannibalism. They begin to kind of explore the liberation of themselves, which can be read as a way for them to find like their own sexual liberations through being their like true authentic selves and giving into their desires. They display like these animalistic characteristics in a way when they behave when going through like these transformations. Female sexuality has obviously always been repressed by society, mainly by men. Shout out to Mackenzie for mentioning the patriarchy as well. And likewise, in all of these films, we see that the women are somewhat repressed by not only the world that they live in, but also the men that are in their lives. They're seen as objects of desire, but they're still repressed by those around them, because the people around them seem to feel like they can claim ownership over these women's sexualities. But what we see throughout all of the films is that the women claim back their power, they claim back their ownership of their bodies, and they claim back their want in like a sexual capacity. So, in a really fun personal anecdote, this was a long time ago. I had a boyfriend who told me that I was similar to Taming of the Shrew, which is a book, and that he felt quite necessary to try and tame my sexuality and my desires. And I think for me, this is why I've always really resonated with these films, you know, and seen that the way the women have to kind of fight against their bodies being possessed by other people in the storylines. And I think, you know, whilst the men in the stories do see these women as sexual beings, that they, you know, they want to experience, they want to be with, they're also very intimidated and frightened by these women who are kind of in charge and control of their sexuality. So what the men try to do is we see that they try to tame the female sexuality, but that obviously just finds them not in the greatest scenario because they get devoured by the women in some manner. So, I mean, for years, women have fought against their pleasure being considered as a taboo topic. You know, historically, female pleasure has always been kind of like secondary to male pleasure. But as we progress as a society, we kind of see how those barriers are being broken down and talked about a bit more openly. In all four films, there is this taboo around their need for human flesh. But as the films progress, we see how those boundaries are pushed and the barrier drops to show that satisfying those needs is like a very important and vital part of the discovery as females with desires. Another thing that kind of comes through in these films is shame. And shame is kind of like looked at with each character almost kind of feeling a sense of shame for their need to indulge in cannibalism. And I think when it comes to sex, there's also an element of shame around kind of like expressing fantasies and desires. You know, it's commonly known that women are probably less likely to communicate their wants to a sexual partner for fear of rejection or being shamed about what they're into. All four films really break down this element of shame and allow the characters to step into their true power, exploring their like true desires, and letting them kind of finally succumb to those cravings that they have. So the first film we will look at is Trouble Every Day. Hopefully you've all seen the films because otherwise there are going to be some spoilers. So Trouble Every Day. So this is a film that's really about kind of coming to terms with having what could be seen as abnormal sexual desires. I do that in air quotes because obviously, you know, there's nothing really abnormal as long as it's all consensual, you know, sex comes in many different kind of flavors, let's say. Cora has this uncontrollable desire to consume, and that's, you know, seen through sexually and through kind of like her hunger for flesh. She has a husband, Leo, who constantly tries to repress her sexuality. And we also see in the film her ex-lover, Shane, also seems to want to do the same thing to her as well. These men are very, I guess they're quite dead set on trying to possess her, trying to control her. They don't really want Cora to have her sexual freedom, her sexual liberation. There's a reading in there that I feel, you know, that Cora could be kind of read as almost like a nymphomaniac, you know, that her urges are, it's very kind of like out of control. She's struggling to be able to control what she needs. And that kind of leads into these men seeing that if they cannot consume her, then the only option they kind of have is to destroy her. So Cora in the film, she uses seduction to get her prey. So whenever she kind of goes out and about in the film, we see scenes where she is luring kind of like lorry workers, standing at the side of the road, almost, in a similar way to a sex worker, kind of flagging them down. She's got like a hunger in her eyes, she's kind of pulling them in, drawing them in. And her husband, Leo, whilst obviously I mentioned a minute ago, he has, this need to repress her, he seems to, in some ways, understand her need to feed. We see at times where he kind of comforts her and sees that what she's dealing with is more of like an affliction, something that she can't help. There's a couple of young boys in the film that become infatuated with Cora. They see her through the windows. They're drawn to her, almost like she's kind of this off-limit sex symbol in a way. She becomes their object of desire. And obviously, because Cora's hunger and sexual appetite is not solely satisfied by her husband Leo, he allows her to get kind of what she needs elsewhere, in a way which could also kind of be a reading for like open relationships, and exploring like sexual needs outside of a relationship if the relationship can't fully meet that sexual desire. But he does repress her. As you'll see in this particular screenshot, he kind of keeps her boarded up at home like a caged animal, kind of starved of sex. And I think he does this because he has, a fear of losing her to someone else. So in one iconic scene, probably one of the goriest scenes in the whole movie, we watch as Cora starts to seduce one of the young boys after they break into the house. And of course, all things go down one path only, and she starts to eat him alive. Obviously, that kind of term as well, being eaten alive, as Mackenzie mentioned as well, like there's a lot of talk around, women being like man eaters, being eaten alive by a woman, and it's almost quite a powerful play for a female. And in this particular scene, we watch Cora kind of devour him. It's pretty distressing, actually. And she's, when we're kind of like horny, we do almost get into like this animalistic power. You want to rip someone's clothes off, tear at them, kind of bite them. If you think of, certain types of sex, like biting is very common, scratching is very common. You almost get into this like really like animalistic state. And we see that with Cora when she's kind of, indulging and like really eating this poor lad. So there's a quote in Trouble Every Day. What's your stance about betrayal? It's probably not like the greatest quote from there, but it really stood out to me. And it's a woman that asked Shane, Cora's previous lover, this. And I think it kind of like really looks into sexual desire and cheating. So it's often said that females are the ones with lower sex drives, but in Cora's case, she cannot control herself. She obviously has like, a high need for sex and to eat. And female repression when it comes to sexuality, if someone is repressed sexually, it can end in betrayal, it can end in cheating, it can kind of end in like this consumption, beyond what's seen as like morally ethical. And Cora is quite uncontrollable. She kind of, gives into all of those desires. As I mentioned earlier, obviously the men in this film, Leo and Shane, they both want to possess Cora and almost take her sexuality away from her, which is a common theme that men are threatened by female sexuality as it embodies power. It brings us kind of into our feminine power, really kind of like builds us up. And when Shane can't possess her or satisfy her, he decides to burn her alive. He's going to destroy her. Looking at another female character in the film, which I think is quite interesting, is there is a young maid in the film. So Shane is actually on honeymoon awful honeymoon with his new wife, and he goes on this venture to find Cora. And during their time in the hotel, there's a maid that him and her kind of like have runnings in over and over. We see in one scene that this maid, she has a boyfriend. However, she still kind of has this attraction to Shane, again, kind of tying back to that element of betrayal and not feeling sexually satisfied, so seeking it elsewhere because there's that urge that really needs to kind of like be satisfied. In a very, very horrific scene at the end of the film, Shane approaches this maid, and they begin to engage in sex. And at first, it kind of seems that she's perhaps into it, but he quickly starts to rape her. And obviously, because again, he's kind of looking to take that power back. He's looking to take her sexuality and do with it as he pleases. He goes so far to kind of, he actually goes down on her, and then he begins to devour her clitoris, which I think is a reading of kind of the way that men will often want to devour all parts of a woman's sexuality and almost kind of take it from her. So that is Trouble Every Day. So the next film we're going to look at is Raw from 2016. So I love, first of all, I just want to say Raw is like one of my favorite films ever. I think it's amazing, especially to look at like sexuality and cannibalism. But it's a coming of age film, looking a lot at discovering sexual desires and kind of, you know, that first understanding of your body and what's going on, and being like, oh God, you know, I think as Mackenzie mentioned, you know, like being a teenage girl, a horny teenage girl is a difficult time. And Raw really looks at that. It shows a lot around kind of like sexual appetite being displayed as a hunger for flesh. And obviously, Justine, our main character, she craves meat, but she tries to fight this in every way possible. But she can't help but want to taste another's flesh. There's a really great like small scene where her flatmate Adrian, who is a gay male, he's in close proximity to her, and she's just staring really intently at like the back of his neck. And it's almost obviously, you know, she's coming out from a point of view that she, you know, clearly wants to bite him and kind of eat him. But I think it's perfect for when, you know, when we're so attracted to someone and like, you know, even seeing like the slip of an ankle or something tiny, just a little bit of their flesh on show, and it kind of sends us like into a feral state, really wanting that person. And Justine's sexual appetite, it can't be contained. Like, it's not like she can just put it to bed. Like, it's overwhelming. It kind of takes her over. And I think, you know, there's a really good kind of correlation between meat consumption and sexual needs in this film. And one thing that, again, Mackenzie mentioned earlier, which I, you know, think is really important to bring up as well, is the fact that this runs in the family. We find out, you know, throughout the film that it's not just Justine that's afflicted with this. Her sister as well is a cannibal. And then at the end of the film, we also discover that her mother is a cannibal as well. So again, tying back into that theme of like it all being around kind of like female sexuality rather than like a male thing. So Justine goes through, I guess, what, you know, could call kind of like a sexual awakening. At the beginning of the film, Justine is quite, I guess she's quite innocent. I think I've actually put in my notes here, she's a bit uptight, which feels a bit mean actually. So she is, yeah, she's quite innocent. She's not very sexual. There's a scene with a big party, you know, there's nudity, there's sex, everyone's like making out with each other. Like, it's very kind of like you can feel the sexual tension and energy through the screen. And Justine shies away from that party, and she's quite shocked by what she sees. And it, you know, in one scene she seems quite shocked as well that her sister Alex is getting involved in this party and displaying quite outwardly sexual, I guess, actions. So Justine has like this innocence about her at the beginning of the film. So then moving on to the scene where we see the blood that's poured over all of the students. I think this can be read as when a woman gets her first period and essentially becomes ready to have sex, I guess, classed as a woman. And if we look at it like that for Justine, obviously just beforehand, we've seen her as quite innocent, shying away from sex, all of those things. But once this kind of blood pouring goes onto her and she gets that like little taste of me, it's like something clicks in her and she's just awakened. And I think it's really interesting that it's her sister that forces the meat into her mouth, almost kind of like forcing her to wake up and, you know, waking the hunger in her. Throughout the film, Justine starts to get, I guess she's sick. She's got like rashes all over her. She, you know, can't stop itching her body. She's kind of shaking. And I think, you know, having that want for sex can almost feel like an illness, you know, again, going back to kind of like that first time when you're a teenager and you realize like, that you do have these sexual desires, it does feel like you're a bit ill. It's like, oh my God, what is this happening inside me? You know, it's eating me up. I need to kind of like get it out. I feel, you know, kind of like feverish with it, with the, you know, the hormones and the hunger. And I think we really see that through Justine when she's kind of like going through these body changes. So then there's kind of would come on to what could be classed as, I guess, her first sexual experience. So it is, of course, the scene where she eats her her sister's finger. Um, it's that first kind of taste for her that really like transforms everything and opens it up. And again, I love that it's kind of looking at it from a point of view of it happening with her sister, because it feels almost like Alex guides her and is kind of guiding her through this. And I think when it comes to female sexuality, it's confusing. Like, it's really tough to get your head around it. And you know, you often will confide in another female. It could be an older sister, maybe your mum, you know, someone close in your family, or a family friend, to kind of guide you, teach you, and get you to understand like what all these kind of female desires are about. So another quote, which I love this one, is "You'll kill a guy's hard on." So Adrian says this to Justine while she's eating like a big sloppy meat sandwich. And I think this can really be read in kind of terms of going back to that element around repression and shame and worrying about, as a female, having to always be thinking of pleasing a male partner, obviously depending, you know, what you're, you know, what way you're kind of into. And I think for this quote, that's exactly what it does, because obviously, you know, he's almost kind of saying that like if she behaves in certain ways or she has certain desires, you know, she has this certain like hunger, that she would be the reason for killing a guy's hard on. And I think, you know, from a female point of view, like that is a thing, you know, it's like, oh, if you did this or, you know, didn't do that, you're gonna kind of like turn them off. So then again, kind of going back to the way Justine is with her sexuality, and when she starts to like really become very kind of like overtaken by this desire. This is her face when she is watching Adrian play a football match. It's an amazing scene, like supercharged, super intense. He becomes the object of her desire. You know, she wants him, she wants to devour him, she wants every part of him. And when she's watching him so intently with those like menacing eyes, you can see that she wants to tear him apart. And you know, that's obviously she wants to eat him, but she also wants to sexually have him. Her desire is so strong that she gets like a nosebleed, like it's just, you know, kind of taking her over. And we see in other scenes where she's struggling to contain this kind of side of her. There's a scene where she starts kissing a guy, and she nearly bites his entire lip off. And it's again kind of looking at, you know, female sexuality as being completely uncontrollable, quite overwhelming. So then I guess she wants to literally consume them, bite him, eat him, fuck them, all of those things. And it's all about kind of like filling and stopping that hunger. And I think, you know, when you look at sexuality, it is a lot about consumption. There's bodily fluids in there, you know, it kind of anything goes. And I think when you look at cannibalism as well, it's gross, it's disgusting. But if you look at sex, you could also say the same, that sex is quite gross and disgusting in many ways as well. And of course, as we go through the film, we see that, you know, her sister also has this desire, and she teaches her to kind of how to satisfy it, how to, you know, get rid of those cravings and those urges. But her sister's sexual appetite is stronger than hers, I guess you could say, or she's more kind of awoken in that sense. And she eats Adrian, and he obviously, you know, dies from that. And we see that Justine is kind of, for her, it's quite this shocking thing to see that, you know, her sister is so overcome with this urge to consume. Okay, so we will move on to Dansma Pugh, also known as In My Skin. So this is a bit more of like an indie film. I feel like it's not as seen as some of the other ones. Again, very gory, very horrific to watch. So this film really looks at like the act of self-consumption. So I guess there's a slight difference here with Esther's character, in a sense that she eats herself rather than eating other people, which I believe is called auto cannibalism. And I believe that auto cannibalism is also goes as far as if you like bite the skin off your finger and eat it. So we're probably all slightly cannibals in some way or another. So yes, this film is very much about that, and finding kind of like this sexual liberation for ourselves. We see as Esther throughout the film, she really goes on like this journey of discovering who she is, and looking like inwards. And I think, you know, we can look at it kind of, this self-mutilation aspect is almost like, you know, whether it's kind of like masturbation, and, you know, discovering what we like in a solo capacity, using it as an act of self-love. Because obviously when we think of sex, we think that it's always linked with a partner, but that's not the case. You know, you can find, probably most of the time for a lot of us, I'm sure it's going to be better. The best sex is solo sex, right? But this is kind of what Esther's journey looks at. And she really kind of like, towards the end of the film, kind of comes to this climax and a sense of becoming one with herself as she begins to devour herself more. Almost, it could almost be seen as kind of like making love to herself, I think. She really gets to know her body. She gets to know what she wants. She's listening to that instinct inside her, which I think, you know, from a female sexuality point, like, that's really important, is kind of tapping into what is it that makes you tick, you know, what really gets you going, and being able to like fully lean into that and explore that. And the other thing I really love in Dansma Pugh is Esther has this like fascination and obsession with her own body. In one scene, she kind of starts to pull at her skin, and just like, you know, starts looking at herself in the mirror a lot more. She's kind of like really becoming obsessed and fascinated with herself, which allows her to kind of like succumb to her desires, and fully kind of like lean into them. So she mentioned, so obviously she is so Esther hurts herself at a party, and this leads to her finding this, I guess, this need to kind of like rip skin off of herself and eat parts of herself. And when her partner asks her, why is she doing this to herself? Why is she hurting herself? She calls it a mindless urge. And again, I think that really takes us back to sexuality being a mindless urge. As I mentioned earlier, it's not really something we have control over. We are controlled by our sexuality. And that's exactly what happens to Esther. She kind of starts to have this, almost her own sexual awakening. And then she begins to have this obsession, which takes us, to one of the previous points, with the pain and the pleasure around this self-mutilation. However, what she does do is she hides this, again, she's got a lot of shame, she's hiding it in private. And I think, lots of women would hide their fantasies, their kinks, their desires, and I think that really talks around it. When her friend kind of discovers that she's doing this, eating her, well, no one finds out she's eating her stuff, but they know that she's self-mutilating. There's an immediate kind of sense that what her pleasure is a sickness. And I think often when we look at kind of like sexual desires that are maybe seen as a little bit more out there, people don't have the understanding of why you would be into that. If someone's into something like BDSM, sometimes it's really difficult for other people to understand that. And I think that's where, female sexuality can often become very repressed, because we don't want to feel rejected when we tell people, well, I'm into this, and, be like kink shamed or something like that. I mean, I think that's exactly kind of what Esther goes through, and why she does all of her self-mutilation in a very kind of private way, because for her that feels like a safe space. So she also has a man in her life, her partner, who seems to be quite possessive over her, of her body, what she should be doing with her body as well. And I think, what we see is Esther becomes more and more herself, more at one with herself, the more she tastes herself, the more she kind of like experiences herself. And in kind of like one of the last scenes towards the end of the film, she locks herself away in kind of like a hotel, and she spends all this time devouring herself and kind of like keeping bits of skin. And in the scene we see like there's lots of meat and there's fruit and there's like ripping of things, and it's very kind of like it's got a lot of senses in there, which I think goes back to really, kind of like sex being very sensual, very senses driven. And while she's kind of in this private hotel, she starts to fulfill her own desires. She's really into that element of self-discovery. She becomes, really consumed in her journey. And her sexuality, I guess it can be read as it's kind of like evolving. She's finding a new form of pleasure with just herself. And I think this is a really good look at kind of that element around like self-liberation and exploration, learning to, kind of love your body, embrace your body, and in turn, that brings you like that sexual liberation of feeling like this really powerful, gorgeous, sexual human being. And we even see, she kind of does things like she starts to kiss her own breast. So there's definitely like sexual connotations there. Whether you could read it that it does become slightly an unhealthy obsession, how far Esther would go. So the last film that we are going to look at is Bones and All. So this is another coming of age sexuality exploration. Obviously we follow the character Maren, who once again we see very similar to some of the other characters, trying to fight against her need to eat people. You know, she's trying to fight against this cannibalism. And I think again that ties really back into how we feel when we're at that coming of age point in our lives, when we're really discovering that we do have these sexual needs, because it's quite, you know, it is quite overwhelming. So you do kind of fight against it. Um, and in, you know, in the running theme of men trying to repress women, we see that Marin's dad does exactly that. He, again, very similar to Cora in Trouble Every Day, he keeps her locked up, you know, repressed away from the outside world. But as Marin becomes a woman, that need to feed becomes even more intensified. Hence why she escapes. You know, she can't help herself. She needs to. And again, you know, I think when you repress someone, you repress their sexuality, all they're going to do is end up going to try and, you know, go out and get that. You're gonna fight to get that. So in this film, slightly different to the others, that it focuses a little bit more on kind of the relationship with one of the, I would say, so we have a term that me and my friends often use, like a green tick guy, and Lee is that in this film, in a sense that he makes her feel very seen, and he never judges her for the fact that she is a cannibal. And I think, you know, that's when it comes to like sexuality, essentially, you know, everyone is looking for a partner that is not going to judge them for their desires and their needs. And that is when we become fully sexually liberated with another person. If they can fully embrace, you know, the sexual wants that we have, even if, you know, even if maybe it's not their usual cup of tea, or, you know, it might seem a little bit strange to them, someone that embraces it and accepts that is the desires and wants of that person. And in the film, we see her objectified by a male, by which kind of goes back to that element, you know, of these men really feeling like once a woman is given her sexuality, that gives it almost like too much power, and they want to take that back. So the first time Marin kind of has this like sexual awakening, and there is a quote in the film that says it's like your first time when you first, you know, lose your virginity, and much like that, you know, her first tasting meat looks at that as well. So in the first sleepover that she has, she obviously bites the finger of this girl, and it is like a sexual awakening for her. There's even, again, you know, going back to that point on the look of people's faces, as you can see from this picture, Marin is, you know, you could easily say she could be having sex. She's got that look of ecstasy, like sheer joy, and release of like satisfying your craving, which is, you know, exactly kind of like the first time you have sex or your first sexual experience. Like, it opens your eyes, it kind of opens this look out there. And Marin, I think there's also a slight reading in here that Marin could have potentially been abused by her dad. If we are looking at this in a, you know, from a female sexuality point of view, the way he talks in some of the videotapes when he's explaining to her, there's some things that he said that sound almost like he's very regretful for the things that he's done to her, that he's left her with a lot of trauma. Obviously that's, you know, there's nothing kind of that confirms that in the story, but I thought it was quite an interesting kind of like thing to look at. So then of course when Marin meets Lee, this is when she really kind of has, I guess, her sexuality awakened. He's very sweet, you know, he kind of looks after her. and there is a tenderness. And I think for when it comes to sexuality, this looks at like, I think for a lot of people, your first sexual experiences can be quite traumatic, and can be quite bad. And that can obviously give you, a somewhat kind of not a great outlook on what sex is to be like going forward. At a young age, if you have a bad experience, then going forward, you might be quite nervous about having sex again, or quite nervous about displaying kind of like your desires and your needs if you feel like you've not had a good time before. And I think what Maren discovers when she is with Lee is that actually, female sexuality and sex, there can be a tenderness around it. And she understands that sexuality can also come with love. You can have both. You could be, a very sexually driven person, and you can also have love with someone. Um, the other thing that I think the film actually picks up on quite a bit on, which I really liked as well, is bisexual identity as well. So obviously, Maren's first experience is with a girl. And then we see later in the film, Lee has an encounter with a guy that he takes into a field to eat. And Maren kind of watches from the bushes. So I think when you look at it from this point of view, like the cannibalism, obviously there's kind of no bounds on who someone would eat. You eat because you want to eat. And I think, that's a great kind of look at sexuality, and it being, it can be very fluid, it can be open. It doesn't just have to be obviously with, the opposite sex, etc. And I think the film kind of brings that in together. So then kind of coming on towards the end of the film, again, a very traumatic ending, which all of these films are quite traumatic in their own rights. But so Maren is struggling very much so with, her need to eat, to consume flesh. And she doesn't want to do it, but Lee is constantly kind of trying to tell her that, obviously she needs to satisfy that hunger. It's like a very insatiable hunger that she has, much similar to sexual hunger. She constantly says, I'm hungry, Lee. She really needs it. And I think, the same with sexuality. It's almost like we have to at some point scratch that itch, and if you let it go on long enough, it's just going to grow and build, and kind of come to a head where you have to indulge in sex or a sexual act. And Lee, obviously, he has a very equal kind of need to satisfy his hunger as well. And they kind of together, they are, trying their hardest not to kind of stray and, eat lots of people. But in this kind of ending scene, I think what we get is a really good look at how one person can really give us that freedom of like sexual liberation, which is exactly what Lee gives to Maren, almost as kind of like his final parting gift. So, of course, he is attacked by Taylor, and he is dying. He is bleeding out, and he tells Maren to consume him, to eat him. It's kind of his gift to her is, take my body, use it because you need it. This is going to keep you going. This is going to keep you surviving. And I think it could be read in the same way, from a sexual point of view, that when you find, perhaps the right partner that embraces all of those things, they're going to give you their body, so that you can kind of feed off it and get what you need from it. Obviously, hopefully, don't fully go and eat them bones and all. But I think it really looks at kind of like, having that complete consumption of someone you love, the want to consume them, and also them allowing you to consume them. So that's kind of all of the films from me today. But thank you so much for listening to me talk a lot about sex. Please, no one send this to my dad, because he will actually be so fuming. But yes, thank you.
Thanks, Zoe. We already have a really great question in the chat. I also want to bring Mackenzie back onto cam. Hey. Uh, yeah, I definitely I look forward to hearing you both in conversation with each other. Um, but I'm gonna start with this question from Alicia in the chat. I agree with the expositions that these female cannibals feel more empowering than other female monsters, but can we think of them as disruptive if they continue to reproduce stereotypes of femininity, such as identification with nature, a voracious sexuality, which is destructive and that needs to be tamed, and an abject body? And she also says, thank you for your talks.
That's
So,
such a good question. I feel like I don't have like a super thoughtful answer, but the thing that like comes to mind is like I feel like all tropes in like the horror genre, specifically as they relate to like femininity, are in some way like reductive and limiting. Um, and so I think that that's since that there's so many like connections between and like through lines across like female cannibals and horror, like there's so many similarities between all of them. Like I think that they are like it's a trope just like the final girl. Um, but yeah, I don't know. I don't think I have any. That's a really good question.
Yeah, that is a really good
Yeah, like a
question.
little inherently regressive. Yeah.
I mean, I guess going back to the first part of the question around is it maybe not good if they like reproduce? I don't know. I think it would probably be good to have more kind of characters like that. I think, actually they are quite empowering, and I think, like seeing that on screen does feel quite empowering. Whether they are disruptive, yes, yeah, probably. I mean, the ones in a lot of these, they're not really doing the world too much good. But I think we need more kind of female characters that are maybe not necessarily like good characters, that are kind of like villains on screen, I guess, in a way, because I think that does kind of make us feel empowered. It's like women can be monsters too, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, I don't think. Maybe that says more about me.
Alicia, feel free to also turn on your mic and camera if you want to ask a follow-up or respond to them, if you wish. Just saying.
Yeah, I don't know if I have a follow-up question because it's something I wonder myself. That when female characters are usually so stereotyped that when you see something that moves a little from there, it feels really liberating. But you analyze it a little bit further and you see that the stereotypes of femininity are still there most of the times. And that's why I thought about that question. But thank you so much for your answers. It was really interesting to listen to you both.
Thank you.
I have a quick question for Zoe. Um, a lot of the times you're referring to some like female sexuality in a very kind of general way. And I'm wondering if you, I mean, sometimes I think you also expounded on this, but if you think that this sexuality is something, like if this is something that is existing on its own in a like a self-evident way, or if it's like a response to repression. Like, is this a sexuality that's existing in reaction to patriarchal repression and yeah, an inability to express that? Or is there something that you're saying about sort of animalistic expression that precedes that?
Um, I think it's probably a little bit of both. To be honest with you, I do feel like, if you look at more kind of like a lot of these films, as I mentioned, kind of the three films that I particularly looked at, the female directed films, I feel like they are a way to kind of fight back against repression of like female sexuality. It's not always been something that's been kind of like allowed to talk about a lot. And I think, you know, having that from kind of like female standpoint in film definitely is like kind of fighting back and being like taking it back, you know, showing these stories. And I think that's kind of a theme that we see even more in kind of like, you know, we've got a lot of recent films that look around like motherhood in horror, or, you know, kind of like trauma in horror, or like, you know, there's a lot of like body horror films at the moment that are around like birth as well. So it's kind of almost that element of that. I think mainly women are trying to, yeah, I guess, you know, claim back these stories and kind of tell it from our perspectives, make sure they get it right. So I think it probably is, yes, a bit more of a response to repression, and to, you know, kind of us wanting to be like, hey, look, you know, this is how our sexuality is, this is how we would display it on screen, much like, you know, those other topics that, you know, women in the kind of horror space are trying to talk about and raise.
Yeah, if anyone has any other questions, please, you know, type away, whatever. I was, you know, you brought up In My Skin, which is one of my absolute favorites. And I don't know, Mackenzie, have you seen the film? Because I'd like to ask both of you, but
Nothing.
okay.
That's so exciting.
It is.
Of our second festival, it was like we were stoked about showing this film as soon as we possibly could.
People came out pretty shell-shocked, like they were not. Yeah. Anyway, I was wondering, you know, I really like this differences you made between inherited and transformative. Like both of you kind of talked about that. But I'm wondering also In My Skin, in a way, it's kind of a different category because it's really coming from herself. Like it's not something external, it's very internal. And I'm wondering how that kind of connects to how you conceived of this female cannibalism topic, I guess.
Yeah, I guess I think it was really interesting to kind of, I mean, I'd love to, after you've seen it, Mackenzie, I'd love to see where kind of like Esther from In My Skin fits within your kind of like, you know, your like stereotypes and kind of what you pulled out in your presentation. But I think she is obviously quite different because she's devouring herself rather than obviously like another person. But I think kind of like, as I mentioned, I really like it as a play on looking at her as a female character that is empowered by eating herself. Like she's kind of going against like the stereotypical norm of what a cannibal would do, and she's almost kind of like doing her own thing, and I really like that kind of portrayal from her. I think she's, yeah, I think she's maybe, I mean, I guess maybe a little bit self-destructive as a female cannibal, but in the film, I feel like you really see her evolve and kind of like become more and more powerful, which I think is quite a great kind of like character arc to see. She kind of, you know, becomes more of herself, more who she is, if that makes sense.
So you have a very like positive reading of the film in a way. Yeah.
I mean, I guess it, you know, there's almost a reading of it that it could be said that, you know, she's not in a good place, you know, because she does disassociate, she's obviously self-mutilating. But I personally feel like she genuinely looks quite happy at the end of the film. I don't know what you would think.
A mixed mixed reading, I guess you could say. Yeah.
Yeah, I think she's responding to a lot of different repressions, you know, with this horrible relationship she has with her boyfriend and all of these different limitations she experiences. So, but yeah, anyway, it's she definitely makes something out of it that is quite inventive. I'm gonna bring up a quote that Mackenzie mentioned when talking about Jennifer's body, which was this scene where you say that what she thought was hunger for sex was just a desire to tear things apart. So I wanted to kind of use that as like a little catalyst for you guys talking to each other about this destructive like this play between sexual desire, desire for destruction, desire for consumption, uh, and also like all of this with, towards thriving, let's say, since you mentioned this being a one of the main characteristics of the girl boss cannibal is doing it
Yeah.
to.
I think that was Ginger Snaps. I think that's something that Ginger says.
Ah,
And
yeah, yeah, I had
I mean
wrong.
they're so similar, truly. Like Ginger Snaps walked so Jennifer's body could run, I think, in like a lot of ways. I feel like, yeah, I feel like that's such a common thread because I think that like, and I think what makes it so interesting in like the context of like talking about like women and horrors, because I think it's like such a like it's such a like hashtag female rage, right, like kind of like storyline. I feel like cannibalism like is used as a vehicle to, yeah, talk about sexual desire, but also to like to give like these like female characters like a very literal like avenue to like process like internal like rage and like anxiety like against like the systems that oppress them. So like stereotypical gender norms, like the patriarchy in general, like and I think like in Ginger Snaps it's just like teen angst, like just like how
Mm.
suffocating and like isolating it can feel to like be a teenage girl and to like not understand like what you're going through. And I think that obviously like sex can certainly be a way to like relieve anxiety and relieve tension and relieve whatever. And I think that cannibalism like becomes like a nastier, more visceral, like whole body like way to do the same thing. um and I think it allows them to like subvert power structure, right, to like to flip that thing on its head and like be the person in control, or like the person like doing like I don't know, like fighting against that system in a very like literal way, I think.
Yeah, I think you're really right about the kind of point around rage. Because it's like, I guess cannibalism feels like quite an aggressive act. And I think obviously that's really interesting from looking at it as like with female characters, because obviously, I think women are always meant to be seen as like, nice and cute and sweet and lovely. But it's like actually there's a lot of, and as you mentioned, Mackenzie, like so much when you're a teenager as well, it's like a lot of angst, like you're so angry, like the world fucking sucks, like everything is awful. And I think, there's like being able to be a female and be like, actually, we do experience, aggression and all of the like really kind of like what would be seen as masculine kind of emotions, which if you see, like if you're talking about like ginger snaps, seeing like a male werewolf seems quite normal, right? Because you're like, of course a man would like transform into like this big hairy gross kind of werewolf thing, whereas for a female like that seems strange, because it's like, well, women should be dainty and should be this and this. So I think like making female cannibals, it's almost kind of like what you could say is, yeah, like something like their way to show these masculine emotions and this transformation into, yeah, like a monster that doesn't feel very feminine in its kind of like portrayal.
Yeah. Yeah, and this is like I think it's literally like a Janelle Monáe lyric, but like it's so profound. It's like everything is sexist except sex, which is power. And I feel like these like stories are all about like a transition or a transference of like power. And I think like if it was like just sex, if it was like if that's all that it was, I feel like it's a little bit less, it's like not as satisfying if it's about like being the person in completely in control and also only being concerned, like having a way to be like only concerned about your own self-satisfaction and your own pleasure in a way that like isn't common, or and certainly is not common like when you're a teenager, or yeah, like in general, to like feel like that is a thing that you can be in control of and to prioritize. And like, and so if you can't consciously prioritize it, like cannibalism becomes this like inherent like a animalistic like need that
Mm.
you, so I think it's like freedom, like I think it like allows like a freedom in like, yeah, in power, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's quite empowering. I think the whole
Yeah.
cannibalism. Oh
Yeah.
yeah, cannibalism is empowering. Fuck yeah.
Yeah. Sure.
There's another question in the chat from John Ann who asks, how would you describe the ambivalence between the strength or superpower of cannibalism and the urge to eat human meat, and on the other hand, the weakness and addiction of it?
That's a good question, actually. Um, I want, yeah. Ooh. I guess around the weakness and kind of addiction of it, I feel like, and Mackenzie, I mean, you kind of mentioned it as well, like the whole thriving thing. Like for some of the characters, like it is more of a choice. Like they could probably avoid it, and I feel like the films, to me at least, or in most of the cannibal films, they never feel, the characters don't feel weak. It doesn't feel like it's coming from a place of weakness and that they're kind of like addicted and overcome. And obviously, I mentioned like Cora, for instance, maybe being like a nymphomaniac and things like that. But it's, again, none of they never feel weak. It doesn't feel like they're like, oh, this is an awful thing that's happening to me. I kind of, it gives them a power, and they make a choice to continue with it. And I think just the portrayal of the characters in kind of these cannibalism films, yeah, it doesn't feel weak, at least not to me.
I completely agree. I don't think that I read it as weakness in any way other than I think that like every single human need is a weakness. Like it's like a thing that is like a weakness as a species, like the need to drink water, the need to get 8 hours of sleep every day, the need to like hit a certain calorie account to stay alive. And I think that this is kind of like the same thing. And what it's reminding me of is like, I remember like getting into a debate with like my friend like a few months ago about like, okay, so if cannibals are like eating human flesh, if like they need like to eat like human fluids or like whatever, like to survive, are vampires cannibals? And like to me, it's like hard no. Like a vampire is not a cannibal and cannibals are not vampires. And like, yeah, as you're saying, it's like, yeah, like some of them like if I'm talking about like Jennifer Check and like not needy, Ginger, like they technically need blood to survive or human flesh to survive. Like it's the thing that feeds them. It's the thing that like, and also it's not even like they don't even technically need it to survive. They need it to like feel their best. Like Jennifer
Mm.
Check when she's not eating boys isn't like literally dying, but she's like her hair sucks, like her skin's gross. You know what I mean? Like she's like not like feeling her best and she's not thriving. And like,
Yeah.
if it's when you think about like vampires, it's like they technically it's better when they eat drink human blood, but they could technically drink cow's blood, right? Like it's like different across like whatever, across like different stories. But like the thing I think that is interesting about the like cannibalism is that like maybe Jennifer and Ginger could also do that. Like maybe they could like eat like other kinds of flesh, but they like are not interested in trying. Like that's not even like something that's on the table for them. And I think that that's like how it feels. Like it's like not necessarily a weakness or an addiction any more than needing to drink water or like eat in general is for them. Like it's just part of like their like internal, like it's just like part of their internal makeup. But yeah, I don't read it as a weakness either.
Um, yeah, I guess my question would be, because it sounds like, you're very much in defense of female cannibals the whole time, which is great. I support it. But I'm wondering, I mean, I guess because of this, maybe part of me is like, do you see maybe any drawbacks or any limitations on female cannibals, or the future of, feminist depictions of cannibalism?
I think like maybe like if we're talking about like limitations of the lived experience of the female cannibal, if we're like looking at it just in like it as reality or whatever, like it's specific to those movies, I think like the risks are like isolation, like being a social outcast, doing crime, like whatever, like it's like all these things that I think that I don't know, like not to be like I literally girl boss like slay. Like I think that like those are all things that like could potentially happen to a woman acting outside of the realm of like societal expectations anyway. Like they're yeah. So I think not any different than normal. I mean, I think that like the future of film, like it's certainly a trend, and like I think that anytime something is a common trend in horror or like becomes a common trope, like sometimes the things that try to be in conversation with that like might lose the thread, like might lose like the underlying like themes just about like feminism and like femininity and like things that like are things become less like they become more diluted and less in conversation with that, like kind of about Zoe, you were talking about like films being really about like trauma right now. And I think that a lot of people, we can draw that back to like the Babadook and like how sincere and like ahead of its time and like amazing that was. And like now sometimes you'll watch a movie that is just like, it's about trauma, you know, like with a very thinly veiled metaphor. I think it like kind of like gets diluted. And I'm sure that that would be possible like with like female cannibalism. I think that that would be like the concern is like they'll have less to say or they'll be less in, yeah, maybe less in connection with that. But yeah, I made some stickers that are little hearts made out of meat that say, I believe in a woman's right to cannibalism. So drop me your P.O. boxes and I'll send them to you. Because yeah, no, I'm really just like, no, she could never do anything wrong. Like I support women's wrongs.
Yeah, I don't see that there'd be like any drawbacks either. I actually feel like we don't have, in my opinion, enough female cannibal films. Like I think it's really like not that popular just yet. And like you said, Mackenzie, obviously if it becomes oversaturated, like the kind of like trauma and the grief that we have seen in modern horror, then yes, potentially. But I actually think there's probably a lot more to explore around kind of like female, the female body, the female experience, sexual elements, growing up, coming of age through, female cannibal lens. And I'd love to also see like some that are maybe actually kind of straight away from showing the characters, because going back to the earlier question, around like femininity, yes, all of the characters, I guess, in a way, are typically quite feminine. So perhaps there's, then more space to have less feminine female characters shown on screen, eating other people. But I feel like there's, a lot that could be done there. And I'd also like to see some that are even nastier and more extreme, because obviously I love them. The gorier the better. Let's have some more of that as well.
I also think it's really interesting to be like having a conversation like this, like, and I think it's like again like part of the reason why it's maybe so like in the zeitgeist right now is like because it also stands so much in contrast to like if you're on film Twitter for more than like 20 seconds, like you're gonna see like stuff about like purity culture in like movies and TV right now, and like specifically around like unnecessary sex scenes. Like I cannot, like I feel like I've seen that term like so many times recently, and it's so funny because like sure, is there a conversation to be had about the way that sex is handled on screen? Absolutely. But like sex or movies and TV are actually extremely sexless right now. Like the amount of like sex scenes per runtime, and I can't remember the study, but I can find it in like movies and TV in the last 10 years are at their ultimate lowest since like the 70s. Like sex is not on screen in a way that could rationally justify the kind of outrage we're having right now. Like people, like it's so funny, like you'll see people saying like name the most necessary sex scene you've ever seen. It's like I can't, like there's none like on TV right now. It's like it's actually so rare for there to be sex on a screen right now. And I think that that's, yeah, I don't know, I feel like those two things are like related, but haven't thought it through yet. But there's something there.
Also, sex scenes don't need to be necessary. Like
Exactly, like what does that mean, necessary sex scene? Like it's like what does it mean? Oh my god. Like it drives me crazy. Drives me crazy.
Any folks want to turn on their cameras, say hello, share comments, so that our awesome speakers don't feel like they're just in front of a computer screen with me and Ellie?
We'll keep talking about sex. It's fine. We'll keep going.
It's also the end of our brain binge now. Like we've had 2 days of very intensive talks and a workshop as well yesterday. And
Congratulations, y'all.
thank you. Yeah, some names I'm seeing and have been seeing several times over these last 2 days. So thanks to folks who've been tuning in. If anyone wants to share anything at all, feel free. We can also cut off the endpoint from our YouTube post later if you don't want that to be shared later. But yeah, feel free to just come say hello. So many anonymous people here wishing to stay anonymous. That's fine too.
I can say I would comment to this talk. Thank you. This is the first one I want to say because I thought really it's a great the talk with the best ending of the brain binge, because it's like a kind of climax from the topics or something. And yeah, and I really love the choice of the movies, and it's really like kind of you opened the subject, and for me it's like Bones and All, the movie which is really on the border of like what my question was leading at, like this decision, is it a weakness or is it a strength, and or is it just being strange or something. And yeah, this was in my mind, so I wanted to share. So thank you for this. Yeah,
Thank you. That's so nice.
Yeah, thank you so much.
really enjoyed.
So takeaway: more sexies, more cannibalism. Like, I think that's
What we want. That's what we're here for. We're going to start. You're leading it, you know, you've got your campaign starting, right? You're getting elected, so
I'll need a vice president. So if you want to hop on the ticket, we'll just you need to.
absolutely.
But I think we can make it happen. Just
Do you have any last questions for each other as well?
I can't think of what we need to talk about. I need to go watch what In My Skin. I need to watch that immediately and then talk to you about it.
I feel like we'll have a lot to say
Yeah.
afterwards. No, I mean, I absolutely loved your talk. Like, I loved, you know, obviously looking at them like from the different kind of like stereotypes, because I think for me that's like a really new way, like in a different way of looking at them. Like, I'd love to now go and revisit all of those films after having seen your talk and like pick up on those different elements through them. But I loved obviously when you know, girl boss kind of like cannibals. I was like, I'm here for this shit. I love it. This is what we need. That should be trending on TikTok, not all of the other ones.
Oh, I see a hand is raised. Feel free to turn on your mic and camera, Rachel.
Hi, I would turn on my camera, but I can't without shutting the application down because I didn't give it permissions. But I wanted to mention, I wonder if the genre isn't getting watered down quite as much because heterosexual men can't really identify with it properly, even though I think that's kind of ironic. I think it sort of flattens this idea of female sexuality and male sexuality. Is male sexuality more aggressive or more consumptive? Into more of like, maybe we're actually all experiencing something very similar. And gender and sex isn't necessarily the main, decider of how we feel sexual. But I feel like it's the kind of genre it's harder for like straight men to come into and feel that kinship with, even though I think maybe they could. It's, feeling violent in sex is probably something men are feeling quite often, I would think.
Yeah. And also like they would, right, you're right that they wouldn't resonate with it. So like if those are across the board the people who are like green lighting films and like doing that, like seeing it as like not attractive to an audience, like I feel like that's like everything I've ever heard about like the marketing behind the scenes of like Jennifer's Body was like, let's make Jennifer sexy and like not like, and let's specifically make her attractive to teenage boys. And like because of that, like the film tanked because it like wasn't like meeting it on its own terms. But yeah, I think that you're right. I think you're onto something there for sure.
Yeah, for sure. And I think as well, you know, if you look at like historically, like there's been so many horror films that women weren't really able to like identify with, or you know, lots of other people as well, not just women, you know, non-binary people can't identify with those stories at all. Like, you know, if you look, so for so many years women were only the victims in horror films. So, you know, I'm sure, you know, women were going to the cinema watching horror films and never really resonating. So I feel like, you know, that, yeah, absolutely men won't resonate with a lot of these films, but then I guess there would be a hope that they would at least kind of try to watch it and you know, see it from like a woman's perspective and get that kind of like different point of view. And you know, I do know some like male horror fans that do really love watching films like these because they feel like it's, you know, a perspective that they don't know, they haven't heard of before, so you kind of learn something different. Whilst they maybe don't fully resonate with the story itself or with the character, they do get like a new perspective on it, which I think, you know, can be interesting from a viewer point of view.
Alicia, did you want to ask a question too, or have a comment?
No, I just wanted to point out that I find it really interesting yesterday that there wasn't much male presence in the talks, like in the audience. And I don't know how is it in the festival, because if there is a festival with all male films, I wouldn't think of not going. And it kind of bothers me how it's the other way around, that films made by women are usually female horror, and you know, it's like a niche, and male films continue to be the for everyone.
I think that's a really,
Patriarchy.
Yeah, I know.
yeah,
Yeah.
I know.
Oh, the systems we are crushed by.
Yeah. Yeah.
it's a really interesting observation. The festival itself, when we have it in person and we screen films, it is a mixed audience. I'm not sure, Ellie, if you would say it's like roughly 50-50, or maybe it's skewed more like 70-30, more women or something like that, but there's definitely, I mean,
Okay.
horror itself is viewed as being such a
Massive.
male genre, macho
Mhm.
genre in some sense, which our festival
Mm.
definitely isn't, but we still attract some viewers who are just very specialized in their interest in horror and genre film. But I think when it comes to this kind of a conference, the themes are going to be so obviously like analytical in like a feminist theory sort of sense, or queer theory. Um, and it's, yeah, it would be great if it attracted more like more students of that who are men, but or yeah, other genders as well. But um I kind of in some ways I'm not surprised that it doesn't, and I really didn't notice. You know, like just the last days I'm like, oh yeah, of course it's like a predominantly female crowd. Like that's what I'd expect, and in a way I'm kind of happy about it, you know, like it makes the environment much more open. Um, yeah, not that it's necessary for that, but it's yeah, I think it's kind of it's a space that's designated as kind of a space of like you know, feminist film inquiry, and I'm not surprised who that appeals to. But what do you think, Ellie?
Yeah, I mean, I think it kind of also varies also with Brain Binge. Like it's their third time. I wouldn't say that it's always been just exclusively. Also, we don't actually know, you know, what the genders of the names here. We don't really know them. But yeah, I do feel like there's definitely a tendency. I agree with Sarah also, like this kind of Brain Binge project is more specific, let's say. And in terms of the fest, also like, yeah, there is definitely more diversity or whatever. But I would say that there is a big chunk of male horror fans that just like hear the concept of our festival, and that's enough for them to switch off and be disinterested, you know? And also we don't need that either. So like it's a mutual, like, that's fine, you know? So that's how I feel about it. I'm not too bothered, honestly. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm really glad when the films that we screen are also showing in more mainstream horror festivals, so that audience members who don't even know what they're walking into and maybe didn't check who directed the film uh, inadvertently end up seeing them and being having their eyes opened and being transformed by them. But yeah, I mean it's two different spaces. A space like Final Girls Berlin is going to attract a very intentional, self-selecting audience in that way, and then it's great when these films infiltrate the mainstream and more and more of them are. Like every year we're going, oh damn, this film we really wanted to show is already showing at Fantasy Film Fest. And we get a little annoyed, but at the same time it's really good that they're showing more and more of these, yeah, films directed by women and trans people.
Yeah, but I have to add that really I brought friends to the Final Film Festival, or I had met people there who wanted to see horror movies and then started to see other horror movies in another way because of the festival. So they went there for the horror movies, and then they came out and say, this is the I can see the movies with another perspective and in another way, and this is really how it works in a way. Yeah. So, or I mean, to look at movies in general differently in a feminist way, or to start to analyze the sexism of some movies and something like this. So, and yeah, so that was part of my experience from the festival. So
That's cool.
yeah.
Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, Rachel wrote in the chat that men being turned off by the idea of discussing gender in horror films is kind of ridiculous to me because so much of the genre is already about gender and sexuality and always has been. And I guess people who aren't really aware of that as a lens are really yeah, not interested in discussing it. I don't know.
Yeah, it's like always been a political genre, like literally always and forever.
Yeah, I think those are good good final words.
Hear, hear.
So thank you all for being here and for sticking it out till the very end of Sunday night of Brain Binge. And the majority of the talks will be viewable on YouTube in a couple weeks, let's say. So if
Tell your
you
friends.
yeah, you can find them later. You can send the links to people. And we'll be back in person March 5th to,
March.
yeah, the 5th to 9th. So it'll go over Women's Day weekend. And we'll be back on Halloween too. So that's a bit sooner than that. We'll have a couple screenings in Berlin that night. So,
And we're also touring internationally. So if you want to check out our events and see if maybe it's your town, it's on our website. So
yeah.
all right.
That's
Thank you,
Mackenzie
everyone.
for this final panel. And yeah, stay in touch.
All right. Bye. Good night, everyone.
Bye.